All right, welcome back to episode 8 of the Agendas podcast. I'm your host, Harry, here with Ben. We're going
Hey,
to
how's
take
it
another...
going?
What's going on? Let's get into some playoff basketball. It's that time of year. It's getting a little deeper into the playoffs. Things are getting a little bit more exciting. You know, the opportunity to see who's going to be the next NBA champion gets closer and closer, kind of filtering out the teams that are frauds or fakers or weren't really contenders. And we're starting to get into the games 4, 5, and 6 of the NBA second round. Let's get into some Denver, Minnesota to start out. Let's start with Denver. Game 3 was a must-win for them. Obviously, no team has ever come back from 3-0, not in basketball at least. And they had, they're trying to defend their championship. Jokic's legacy, people were talking about, is he deserving of 3 MVPs? Is he quite what people say he is? Is he overrated? Things like that. And they absolutely responded. They blew out Minnesota by close to 30 points. The game was kind of over in the second quarter, pretty much, early third at the latest. And it was kind of a balanced effort from Denver. I would say it wasn't necessarily a Jokic 50-point game. We're not losing this game type of performance, or Jamal Murray goes crazy, some outlandish type of thing. It was just they got back to Denver Nuggets basketball. They in the pick and roll, they were able to create more space for Jamal Murray to get his shots off, for MPJ to get his shots off. Obviously, MPJ, it's kind of hard to contest him. He's 6'10", and he just shoots the lights off. He doesn't really see the contest. LeBron was talking about that on his JJ Redick podcast. But Nikola Jokic played Nikola Jokic basketball, and they just flat out dominated them. Minnesota was not ready. I don't know if Minnesota thought that, the Denver would kind of roll over, but, Denver responded with the hearts of champions that they are. And that's typically what these caliber of teams do. And it was nice to see that Denver is that caliber of team. They weren't just, we won the championship last year, and we're happy that we did that, and let's kind of roll over, and maybe we'll try again next year. They fought for their playoff lives. Obviously, they're not out of their hole by any stretch of the imagination because they dug themselves quite a hole. Losing both home games is almost a death sentence. But they definitely, responded in Game 3, and they set up a Game 4 where if they win, they're right back in this series and arguably have control of this series. But if they lose, they're still, in a deep hole. So the pressure is still on for Game 4, and we'll see how Nikola Jokic and Jamal Murray respond. I'm expecting probably a better Minnesota performance. So I think it might take more of that superstar effort that we talked about, that Nikola Jokic scoring 40 points or Jamal Murray scoring 35-plus points or something like that. Maybe a big Aaron Gordon game like we saw in round 1. But, Ben, what were your main takeaways from the Denver side of Game 3?
Yeah, listen, I'm just happy they won. I'm excited to see a game 4 of this series that's, actually legitimate. Like you said, Denver hasn't dug themselves out of their hole at all. Jokic, like we were talking about, people were talking about Jokic as though he already won the championship, with the expectation that they were going to win the championship this season, and they hadn't done it yet. And if they lose, game 4, down 3-1, that's kind of over as well. So the Denver Nuggets as a quality of team and where this team goes down in the pantheon of teams and where Jokic is going to go down. I mean, Jokic will have more opportunities, but, where Jokic specifically as well is going to go down in terms of his legacy is really still on the line of game 4. This was a 2-part hole they dug themselves in. Handily took care of part 1, but part 2 is equally as important as part 1. So if they don't take care of part 2, part 1 doesn't really matter. Kind of the one thing of note here, Denver shot 20% better from 3 than Minnesota. So that's going to help. A lot of teams are going to win if you shoot that much better from 3 on similar amount of shots. But I'm excited for game 4.
Yeah, I like the way you put that in terms of it's a 2-part, hole they dug themselves into, and they dominated game 1. But as we talked about in the playoffs, games don't carry over. Clearly, as we just saw Minnesota blow out Denver and then Denver blow out Minnesota, games don't carry over day to day. So it's going to be another challenge, and Minnesota knows what's on the line. They know that, if they can win this game, they take a commanding 3-1 lead, and they put the defending champions on the brink. I expect a better Anthony Edwards performance, but let's switch a little bit to the Minnesota side of things. And their offense struggled again. And an underrated storyline of this playoffs is Minnesota's offense has never really been good. It hasn't really been talked about just because they've won pretty much every game. They were 6-0. This was their first loss of the playoffs. But their offense has not been good. I mean, Anthony Edwards has been spectacular for the most part. We'll talk about that maybe a little bit about his somewhat inconsistencies relative to some other players potentially. But, even if Anthony Edwards kind of, I think he had like 18 points in this game. The game was kind of out of hand in like the second, third quarter. So I don't, as far as his counting numbers, they're not going to be there just because, it was kind of over and Minnesota benched their players and kind of decided to get ready for game 4. But, even if Anthony Edwards has been having his 35, 40-point games, and they've been cracking like 105, 100, numbers like that, which in today's NBA is pretty low scoring, and that's with great performances from their superstar. So, that's kind of why I didn't fully believe, if you listen to our NBA preview for the playoffs, I didn't fully believe in Minnesota as a contender. Obviously, I had them out in round 1, which didn't happen, but and the main reason I mentioned was just because their offense, I don't think they have enough scoring outside of Anthony Edwards. Towns is, he can shoot the basketball, but he's not really going to create his own shot. So Minnesota's recipe for success is have a historic defense, and Anthony Edwards scored 40 points. Is that sustainable? We will see. But they've definitely put themselves in good positioning, and I think if they're able to close out Denver, they'll probably be favored in the next series. So they definitely put themselves in good position, but it's going to be interesting to see if they're able to hold on and close out the defending champions.
It's funny the way you describe Minnesota's strategy. It sounded like the Knicks strategy. So in certain ways, Minnesota is just a better version of the Knicks. Not a much better version with a lot more dynamic, etc. But it was just interesting. They're kind of using the same strategy. But yeah, I mean, you hit the nail on the head from the beginning of the playoffs with Minnesota. Is that their offense is just not great, and they've basically just been at 100 points every game, which is not great. Just their defense has been that good. And tonight their defense wasn't that good. Their offense kind of seems like it's been pretty consistently 100 points, to overgeneralize. But it seems like their offense basically is what it is. And is, their defense going to be able to play at that elite level? It's kind of the same thing as the Nuggets, where the Nuggets had the issue of they weren't really playing great against the Lakers, which no one kind of talked about it because they just won. Where Minnesota kind of had this thing with their offense that no one's talked about because they've been winning. So we'll see. This is Denver's kind of first game where they felt like they played great basketball this whole playoffs. But games don't carry over, and we'll see which team can overcome their flaw, or even if they both kind of keep playing with that same flaw that they have, which flaw matters less than the other teams. If that makes sense.
Yeah, it definitely makes sense. I think that Denver had a game 3 against the Lakers that they played pretty well, but again, they hadn't played that dominant Denver Nuggets level basketball that we've seen in the past in last year's playoffs and some regular season games and things like that. But as far as Minnesota, we'll talk about the Mavs in a second. Can they have that random role player go off? That that's kind of would be their recipe. Role players tend to play better at home. So maybe that potential is there, or maybe a big Karl Anthony Towns games, which you don't see many of those in the playoffs at all. But I guess you never know. But yeah, I think if they manage to squeak out game 4, the hole is just going to be too big for Denver to climb out of. But I don't necessarily feel great as a Timberwolves fan. Definitely not as good as I felt after game 2. But game 4 should be good. When we're recording this on Sunday before game 4, this might come out after game 4. So we'll have to see how Denver responds. But let's move on to the other series in the Western Conference, and that is Dallas versus OKC. This was kind of a shocker to me. After game 1, I obviously picked OKC in the series. I did pick it in probably 6 or 7, but OKC kind of handled Dallas in game 1, kind of shut down Luka to an extent. And Luka hasn't had a great game through these first 3. But Dallas has still been able to manage to squeeze out 2 of the 3. And the main reason for that being is P.J. Washington, who after game 2, he had like 7 threes, I think it was. And I was like, okay, that's the P.J. Washington game. Let's get back to reality. But, he did it again. 25-plus points again in game 3. At home, role players do tend to play better at home, as we mentioned. But if you would have told me Luka has not really played great through the first 3 games, and the Mavs up 2-1, and you haven't really had a spectacular Kyrie game. I think he's been pretty solid, but you haven't had like, oh wow, that's Kyrie Irving type of game. I'm pretty surprised that Dallas is up 2-1. But Ben, what are your main takeaways from the Dallas side of things after 3 games in this series?
Yeah, I mean, like you said, it's basically PJ Washington. Game one, PJ Washington, 7 total shots, 2 threes. They got wrecked. These last 2 games, PJ Washington's essentially playing like a third star for them, and they're winning these games handily. So, kind of how I see it is PJ Washington going to play like PJ Washington, or he's going to play like Kevin Love, in terms of just to give the Cavs analogy in terms of the 3 stars. On both sides, the top 2 stars really haven't played dominant basketball. You know, they played good, but that's kind of evened out. And then the Mavs have a third star right now. We'll see if that keeps going. Obviously, for OKC, you know, they got to win Game 4. Not going to pick them to come back from a 3-1 lead. And then just to touch on this game specifically, I mean, this is kind of how I predicted the series to go. I think these teams are pretty even, but if we're going to get into a close game at the end, you know, the type of the game where the NBA is going to post on, you know, YouTube, crazy ending, last 4:52, which basically just means it was a close game at the end of the game, rant over, the Mavs are going to win those games, and essentially that's what happened tonight.
Yeah, and the other point I want to touch on OKC a little bit more. Shea's been pretty good throughout this playoffs. You know, he hasn't had like a unbelievable game, I would say, an MVP level game, but he's been solid. He's got his 30 points or whatever it is. But Jalen Williams has to step up to the plate. Now, it might seem a lot of a pressure on Jalen Williams, who hasn't been talked about maybe as much, but people have mentioned him as a most improved player of the year candidate. I don't know if they came out with that award. I don't think he won, or I don't think he will win if it comes out. But for an OKC team, when you move deeper into the playoffs, you definitely need that second scorer. Alongside Shea and Jalen Williams, they need a guy who can consistently score 20 points. I thought there was potential for Jalen Williams to become that guy this playoffs. It might just be a year too soon. The hype was maybe a little bit too much, but that's going to be the key for OKC. If they're going to win Game 4, I expect a big Jalen Williams game to come alongside a Shea Gilgeous-Alexander to move them back into OKC tied and potentially back in control of the series.
I mean, for sure, they're definitely going to need that. That's going to be a minimum. But I mean, you just look back at Game 1. I mean, they're either going to need him to step up, or you just go back to Game 1. PJ Washington plays like PJ Washington. That'll work as well. So I think there's a couple different recipes for OKC. I'm not counting them out, but I mean, must win Game 4. And I'm giving the Mavs, the edge in any close game. So I'm still giving the Mavs the edge. But assuming OKC wins Game 4, there's no reason to think this isn't going to go 7.
Yeah, and here's a little bit of a bold prediction. I think there's going to be a team that comes back from 3-1 in this playoffs. I see it happening just in today's NBA. Games are a little bit wonky back and forth. We talked about the three-point shot a lot. Ben's bringing up the team's different three-point percentage and how that affects the game. And a lot of times it just comes down to that. Which team shot better from 3? But I think there is potential for teams to come down from 3-1. We saw a team last year in the Boston Celtics almost come back from 3-0. So it is, no one's going to pick it. And it's going to be, it's definitely a rough thing to do. But, for a team, let's say like Denver goes down 3-1, especially if they have Game 5 at home, I think there is potential for that to happen, and we'll see if it does. But, again, you can't rely on that. And Game 4 is probably a must-win game for OKC. Did you have anything else to add on these Western Conference teams before you head over to the East?
Yeah, I mean, if I would pick a team to come back from 3-1, it would definitely be Denver. After seeing this game and them being the defending champion team, and I think it's we're not going to know until they go back and win a second championship, but I still believe that they have some of that inevitability DNA, and so even if I'm not going to pick it, but if I had to pick one, it would definitely be Denver by far over OKC to do that. And then the other thing, just on the player, most improved player of the year, Tyrese Maxey won it. And we had no votes for Jalen Johnson. So very disappointed about that.
Oh,
okay,
man.
We can now move on. Thank you for listening.
Resident Hawks fan Ben not happy about that.
Yeah, Aaron Neesmith got more votes than Jalen Johnson here. I don't think they're watching the Hawks.
They're definitely not watching the Hawks. Jalen Johnson, by the way, a little bit of a random mention. But he definitely deserves some credit for most improved player of the year. And watch out for the future when Jalen Johnson's winning, you know, multiple All-Star game selections. Just remember where you're here to hear first from resident Hawks fan Ben. But yeah,
Jalen Johnson will have more All-Star appearances than Aaron Nesmith. That's all I gotta say.
that's a bold take. It might be tied at 0, but we'll have to see. Side rant about most improved player. If you are a good player and you just get more shot attempts per game, you did not become a better player. Okay, that's not how basketball works. If I give you 15 shots a game and you average X amount of points, 90% of players, if I give them 20 shots a game, they're going to score more points. That's not most improved. Rant over. Probably should have been Kobe White or someone like that who actually improved at the game of basketball. Or Jalen Johnson.
Kobe White was 2.
Okay, so yeah.
Maxey had 319 points and Kobe White had 305, and then it was a big drop off to the number 3.
Yeah, I just think they've lost what that award should be. But again, that's a side rant. Let's get back to some playoff basketball. And let's head over to the, which has been more interesting than I thought. And, let's start with that Pacers-Knicks. When you were talking about this series in the beginning, I was like, Knicks in 5, Knicks in 4. But it was kind of those like Knicks in 4, but you don't want to pick a sweep. So you like Knicks 5. And Ben was kind of like, I think it would be a competitive series. I give the Pacers a shot. And I was like, I don't know. And he's been absolutely right. The Pacers have been in all 3 games. If not for Adam Silver calling that screen on Miles Turner in game 2, the Pacers might be up 2-1. But just like every Knicks playoff game, it comes down to the final 3 minutes because that's how Tom basketball games. He plays every single player, 48 minutes a game. I saw like a tweet. I think Josh Hart was like sitting on the bench for like 2 minutes and like he didn't know what to do with himself. It's just insane. But that's how Tom Thibodeau runs his basketball team. So that's what it is. But side note, I love when teams do the T-shirt thing where they have all the fans wearing the same colored T-shirt. It brings such a good like vibe to the stadium, and I think it adds so much to the home court. But that's just a side point. The Pacers do have a good home court, but this game was tied with 25 seconds to go. Aaron Nimhard had that go-ahead step back game winner. We got a classic bang, which. That's always exciting. He still got it after all these years. Shout out to Mike Breen. But the shocking thing about this game, I know Ben is our resident 3-point analyst, but just to touch on it, the Knicks shot 50% and still lost, which is pretty rare in today's NBA. Unless the other team shoots better than that, but the Pacers didn't. But the Pacers, it kind of looks like they're just a relatively even level team to the Knicks, I want to say. I guess let's start with the Pacers since I've been talking about them a little bit. And obviously you have the Aaron Nimhard step back 3-pointer game winner, which is kind of a little bit fluky probably, but role players do play better at home. That we do talk about that. Halliburton back for a big game. So I guess this game he was healthy, as opposed to the other games where he played bad and he wasn't healthy, but that's how it goes. That's one of our big side points. But they're down 2-1. I feel they're in good position. Force in their house. They've been able to guard Jalen Brunson pretty well in game 3. I thought he didn't shoot a great percentage. And again, if I'm playing the New York Knicks, Jalen Brunson cannot score. Other than that, I do not care. Dante DiVincenzo actually went off in this game a little bit. But I can live with that. If I'm the Pacers, let's stop Jalen Brunson. If we stop Jalen Brunson, he doesn't go off. A good chance we're going to win this game. But Ben, what were your thoughts on the Pacers side of this game?
I mean, this isn't really the Pacer side. I mean, a couple things. I want to touch on the announcer. I have an announcer take at some point. In terms of this game, this game is just shuffling deck chairs on the Titanic. Like, I don't care about this series. Like, they're losing to the Celtics, so who cares? I don't think either of these. Besides for that, I don't think either of these teams is just good at basketball. I feel like these are like 8 seed quality teams. The Knicks, I'll give a little more credit than that, but like, I just. They see the series is kind of irrelevant. I had something I was going to touch on. I'm sorry for this awkward gap to the audience.
Announcers, Knicks, Jalen Brunson.
Oh yeah, in terms of defending Jalen Brunson as a strategy, I don't know the Pacers have that as an option. Like I don't think they have a guy on their team who can defend him because they're just going to foul him. Like I don't think I don't think they have a way to defend him without fouling him. I don't think they have the veteran defenders that it's going to take to do that. And so I think Jalen Brunson, if they load up on Jalen Brunson, I think Jalen's just going to be on the free throw line the whole time. So that's that. And then the announcer, who is the old announcer who was he's super old. He was doing Thunder Mavs. I think it was maybe 2 games ago where 2 games ago where the Mavs won by like 10. Do you know who I'm talking about?
I don't know. Maybe Kevin Harlan? I don't know.
Let me give this a quick Google. But do you have any other takes, on the Knicks?
Yeah, that take on Jalen Brunson, the Pacers don't have anyone to guard Jalen Brunson. Ben, in the playoffs, you know what happens to superstars? They get guarded by 2 people. That's called being an NBA superstar, okay? So if you don't have the personnel to go after Jalen Brunson, especially he's kind of a foul baiter. I kind of lost some respect for him in this series, just the way he plays. You kind of have to play like that because you're short in the NBA playoffs, especially when you're trying to get to the rim and stuff like that. But he just, the flopping he does and all that stuff. It's not enjoyable to watch. We saw that with Embiid. We saw that with Brunson. So I'd love to see them throw 2 people at him because I just don't think the Knicks have anyone else. If that's Donte DiVincenzo is going to continue to hit, 15 3-pointers per game, I just, I don't see who else they have in terms of an option. They have some good players and some good role players, but they're just not players who are going to create their own shot, and I can live with any of them shooting the ball outside of Jalen Brunson. So, I think that's honestly the recipe. Hold Jalen Brunson to a low percentage. He's going to shoot so many times. He's going to score close to 30 points. He shot, I think, 26 times in this game, plus all his free throws. So he's, including his free throw attempts, he's shooting the ball 30-plus times every single game. They're wearing him out. We'll see what happens if he can just play through this workload. But I also disagree slightly. I'm going to continue here while you Google that. I'm going to disagree slightly on their chance versus Boston. I haven't been that impressed with Boston. I mean, I think they're just probably more talented, so they're just going to win in the next round. But I don't view Boston as this big, massive juggernaut, especially without Porzingis. Tatum, he bounced back. We'll get into the Celtics in a bit, but I'm not necessarily sold that there's a 0% chance that the winner of this series can't compete with the next series.
Yeah, we'll get to Boston. In terms of doubling Jalen Brunson, 100% do that. Even with doing that, from what I've seen from the Pacers so far, Jalen Brunson is still going to get fouled every other play. So even if they do a double, I'm not confident they can do it without fouling. But they haven't really fully gone to that from what I've seen. And so definitely, I'm not sure why that's not at least the first strategy you try and see if it's going to work. So I agree with you on that. I found the announcers. Dave Patch and Hubie Brown, Harry. Which one of those is super old?
Hubie Brown.
Hubie Brown was, I'm going to try to say this appropriately. That guy and Luka Doncic must have that guy on the payroll, bro. That guy was hardcore rooting for the Mavs and specifically Luka Doncic. I literally every single play just analyzing how Luka Doncic is doing this and that. It was out of control. I'm a Braves fan, and often this happens to the Braves in the playoffs, where specifically if they play the Dodgers, you kind of get the vibe that the announcers are rooting for the Dodgers. Even John Smoltz rooting for the Dodgers, and I do see this with other teams as well. You see it. But this, to me, was the most extreme I've ever seen it, where I thought I was on the Mavericks broadcast. I do illegal streams to watch the game, and I thought I was on the Mavs broadcast watching the game. It was out of control.
Yeah, I'll take your word for that. I don't remember anything specifically, but they definitely do fall in love with players. The one example I can think of with an announcer and a superstar player like that is Doris Burke and Joel Embiid. Oh my God, you can't even turn on the game. You got to watch it on mute. Or you got to watch it from the other team's broadcast. I guess those are ESPN games, so it's kind of one broadcast. But Joel Embiid breathes, look at the way that he breathes, unbelievable. It's in my Colin Coward voice, but
thank you, Colin.
Exactly. But that definitely does get annoying, and it's just you can appreciate a player's great performance or greatness without oh, look at the way he dribbled around the screen. It's we don't need to analyze that. That's not an impressive feat. But I definitely hear that.
All right, let's get to the Celtics. I gotta go.
Okay, let's get to the Celtics real quick. The Celtics responded to Game 3 in Cleveland. Kind of a controlling victory overall. Jason Tatum bounced back in kind of Jason Tatum fashion. a bunch of mid-range step backs, things like that. He has had some clutch moments, so I'm not going to bash him, but this is kind of like a peak Jason Tatum. Like, the game doesn't actually matter, but, like, it kind of seems clutch. Like, wow, what a performance by Jason Tatum, but it's like they're going to beat the Cavs, so, like, whatever. Jalen Brown played well again. Or he played very well this game. Kind of a bounce-back performance overall from the Boston Celtics. Did you have any takeaways from the Boston side of things? Do you still view them as the overall favorite in the East?
Definitely still the overall favorite in the East. Like you were saying, I haven't been overly impressed. I've not been concerned. To me, Boston gets overjudged based off of the perceptions, either true or false perceptions. They might be true, but they get over analyzed because of those perceptions. They lose game 2 when they shoot 20% from 3. Like, you're gonna lose that game like 10 out of 10 times to anybody, especially a quality opponent in the Cavs. So, and then they come back and they win, and they're winning game 1 and game 3. They won in quality fashion. Specifically in game 1, they never really put the Cavs away. They were up by 8 the whole time, but they couldn't get it to 15 and end it. Boston's been playing really, really well. But based off what I've seen from the Knicks, I'll up them from 4% to 10% chance to beat the Celtics. And the Pacers, I will downgrade from 0% to negative 0%. They're not winning. I would be surprised if they won 2 games. I view Boston as the overwhelming favorite in the East, and will not be the favorite. It depends who comes out. We'll see if the Mavs come out. I might have different things, but against the Timberwolves or Denver, definitely would have Boston as not the favorite.
There's Ben writing OKC off officially. No side point, but let's talk about the Cavs a little bit, just for a minute or two. Donovan Mitchell kind of just scores 30 plus points, and like the rest of his teammates like don't want to help out. Mobley was okay in this game. I've been hearing about Mobley's going to turn into some offensive superstar, the next Tim Duncan for the past 46 years. He's in the NBA. I think he's been in the NBA like 2 years, 3 years. But he's just not going to be great offensively. I think everyone's like, you got to give him time. Yeah, go ahead.
Is he the DeAndre Hunter of the Cavs?
He's the DeAndre Ayton of the Cavs, except for good part is the defense, and he's like a really good defender, but like you hear the name Evan Mobley, like, ooh, Evan Mobley, great potential, Tim Duncan Jr. Like, Tim Duncan was winning 50-plus games as the best player on the team in his second year. I think he might have won the championship in his second or third year. So let's stop with the Tim Duncan stuff. First, you got to be patient on an offensive game. I don't know. I don't see it. He just doesn't have the moves. You know, he could be tall and long and great defensively, but, you know, offense is a whole different ball game. Maybe he tops out at like a 20-point-a-game player, which is still a very good player, maybe a borderline all-star level player, but you know, the Donovan Mitchell, Darius Garland thing just doesn't work together. Ben was talking about that with the 2 guards. And Darius Garland, he just hasn't shown up in these playoffs. It'll be interesting to see if Donovan Mitchell requests a trade after this year, but that's going to be the interesting thing. We'll talk about that once the Cavs get eliminated, if they do. But I think Game 4, they could still have a shot. But it feels like one of those series that even if it goes 6, it's going to be like the Celtics blew them out in 6 games.
Yeah, I would give the Cavs have equal chances with the Pacers to win the series at this point.
Okay, let's wrap it up with that. We'll have another podcast out. Maybe we'll record Wednesday, so maybe it'll come out Thursday, something like that. Once these series get a little deeper into the playoffs. Don't forget to follow us on social media at The Agendas Pod, YouTube, TikTok, Twitter, and Instagram. And we'll catch you guys in the next one.
All right. Bye.